TCI is brought to you by Spendthrift's Malibu Moon, AP Indy's leading son and sire of 3 Grade 1 winners in 2017, led by undefeated Del Mar debutante winner Moonshine Memories.
Welcome back to TCI, your inside track to the Breeders' Cup. Alongside Joel Cunningham, I'm John Siegel. Well, Joel, we don't have any races to recap, but we do have some winning ends this weekend. Let's start off with the Woodbine Mile. We have a turf horse here in North America that's running pretty well right now. Mark Cassey trains him, and of course that's world approval. Tell me, you think he's got a big shot in the Woodbine Mile?
He's the horse to beat, there's no doubt about it. I mean, here's a horse that, again, just based on his pedigree, he's that live oak homebred, that good mare win approval that they have. She produced ZA approval, Breeders' Cup Mile contender a few years ago, if you remember him. I think he was a Ghost Sapper. Miesk approval, which was what, about a dozen years ago, won the Breeders' Cup Mile, upset winner there at Churchill. So a lot of milers in the family, they're all horses too that if you look at that pedigree, they're just okay at 3. They get a little better at 4, 5, 6. I mean, the older they get, it's like a fine wine. Everything out of this mare just gets better and better. I've always thought this colt would be better turning back to a mile. I was very anxious to see him cut back because he'd been running, you know, mile and an eighth, mile and a quarter. I thought his race this year in the Dixie was fantastic. Just a visual turn of foot going a mile and a 16th. So when they cut him back in the 4-star Dave going a mile last time out, I loved him and he ran spectacular in there. I think he's no doubt about it, North America's best miler now. But that Woodbine Mile is a tricky race. He draws the inside post position. It's a big field, and it's a one-turn mile there, John. So it's a tricky type race. I do think he's a legit miler right now. Matter of fact, if I had a TCI top 5, he'd probably be at the very top of it, especially not knowing what Europeans are going to show up for the mile this year.
So are there any Europeans that are going to ship over for the Woodbine Mile that could be big contenders in there?
Man, I love this field. I think this is a great Woodbine Mile field this year in terms of competition. I mean, Coolmore brings 2 over, so that's where you start with the Europeans, right? Deauville, you know, a horse that he's never won at a mile, John, but, you know, he was on the board in the Queen Anne behind Ribchester, which is Europe's and probably the world's best miler right now, most people would consider. So he has some form going a mile, even though he's never won there. You know, he was beaten 3/4 of a length last time out in the Arlington Million, so he's familiar with shipping over here. Everybody knows that this horse, you know, I think a couple years ago, they didn't even run him in the Secretariat as a 3-year-old. They pointed for the Million, and the horse ran well. He only got beat half a length running 3rd in there. So a lot of class with Deauville. He's your morning line favorite. I think their other horse has a shot. He's a 3-year-old, Lancaster Bomber, a horse that loves firm ground, John. They brought him in. We picked him last year in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, and he ran 2nd. Good race in there. He's a horse that loves firm ground. If you look at that race two back at Royal Ascot, where he got sort of a type of turf course he'll get here in North America, even though this horse only won 1 time, he's another horse that's just a maiden winner. He was 2nd to Barney Roy over there, ahead of Thunder Snow in the St. James Palace.
Okay.
Very prestigious mile race for 3-year-olds, John. So he's getting 12 pounds in here from a horse like World Approval in terms of weight. He's a horse that's very interesting to me over a firm ground. And look, I think there's even other horses in here. Dutch Connection, he's a horse I bet last year in the Breeders' Cup Mile. I've been chasing him quite a bit. He was 70-1 in that race, didn't run as well, but he comes over here with some form that he could appreciate that one-turn mile configuration, and he has some backclass for Godolphin. So I think this is a very good race in here. Monty Elise, he's getting a little long in the tooth, but he won the Million a couple years ago. You know, a formidable miler there too. So I think this is a great race. No question this is the race of the weekend, but World Approval, I think the race goes through him if he gets a clean trip.
All right, before we leave, it's not a winning in, but let's talk about Northern Dancer real quick. Who do you think's got that race?
Well, it's worth talking about because I do think one of Europe's, you know, maybe better turf type horses going that 1 1/4, 1.5 mile distance that could come over and appreciate firm ground at Del Mar in the Breeders' Cup Turf is a horse by the name of Hawkbill. Now, he's not as good as some of the better Coolmore horses there. You know, a horse like Highland Reel has beaten him on a couple different occasions, shown that he's better. Highland Reel is still the horse to beat in that Breeders' Cup Turf division, but watch out for Hawkbill this weekend. You know, he'll be a short price in that Grade 1 Northern Dancer. It's not a very good field besides him. He really towers over his rivals in there. I want to see what he's made of in that race in terms of, you know, being able to beat a field. He should handle his last 2 races. You know, it's when I look at the, you know, the time form ratings, he's got 123 time form ratings in the last 2 races. So here's a horse that should be on top of his game, should handle this type of field, and he's getting Lasix for the first time. If he can make a successful run in here, watch for him next time out in the Breeders' Cup Turf.
All right, and then before we talk about some 2-year-old racing and another win in your end, I know you wanted to mention, I think it's the sprint division there, and I believe Whitmore's running this weekend.
Well, if we're talking Breeders' Cup, to me, you know, they've got the Masters for fillies, I think Monday at Presque Downs, a $400,000 race, but it's on the Tapeta. So to me, when I look in there, I don't see many Breeders' Cup filly mare sprint contenders off the top of my head. But when I look at a horse making a comeback in the Grade 3 De Francis Dash at Laurel Park this weekend, I see Whitmore, a horse that you could make the argument earlier this year that he was one of the best sprinters in the country, particularly when, you know, after Mind Your Biscuits came back from Dubai and took a little break there. This horse was really on top of the division at Oaklawn and at Churchill earlier this year, and obviously ran well on Preakness Day. He did not run so well in the True North, and they've given him a little bit of a break. He's been very, very active and good on the work tab. I expect him to run well here. He's a true 6-furlong type horse here, has a really big closing punch in here. I'm anxious to see how Whitmore runs because he's a horse that should factor in on the TCI Top 5 for the sprint division if he can make a good return in here.
All right, well, let's talk about the last win in your end, but before we do, I want to look at the 2-year-old division for the TCI Top 5. You know, we had some good 2-year-old racing. I just want to see, do you have any changes going into this weekend?
You know, I don't have any changes because it's a little early yet, John, to start making changes. You know, if I were to make change in here, I mean, Nero's a horse that, again, he's just a maiden. Everybody knows about that maiden race to where he gave it up at the end, was nailed there on the wire. There's some mental things they're working through, but he hasn't even worked back since that maiden race yet, so more than likely he's not going to make the juvenile. He'll probably come off the list and some other ones will come up. Very happy with my number 1, my number 3, Dak Attack. You know, it's very interesting. We'll talk about a horse from the Albaugh connections and trainer Dale Romans this weekend that's going to run against 10 City. And that's Hollywood Star, who I actually think might have a better opportunity amongst all those good Albaugh horses to be a true 2-turn horse when I look at his pedigree. He'll run in the Iroquois and he'll face my number 5, 10 City, John. And 10 City's very interesting because he was very disappointing last time out at Ellis Park when Dak Attack beat him. However, when you start looking at his pedigree, it's very easy to discount him based on his sire. And you'll say, you know what, he's run away and hide as his sire. No wonder he's an early sprinter. He'll fizzle out and the generation will catch up to him. I don't get that impression when I see him run. He's out of a Rock Hard 10 mare. To me, he looks more like the Rock Hard 10 when you're looking at 10 City here. You know, I think he has plenty of frame to handle more ground. So he's a horse that I'm very interested to see now. He's getting around 2 turns, going 7 furlongs to a mile and a 16th here. And I don't like where he drew in the Iroquois. And I'm a little concerned about his trip. And I'm a little concerned about Hollywood Star's trip in there too. They're the 2 to beat. And they drew the 1 hole and the 2 hole. So they're going to have to push out of there. I mean, this is a field of 10 in here. You don't want to get shuffled back at Churchill Downs, certainly in your first time around 2 turns for these colts. But I do think both of them can handle 2 turns, and I think those 2 are the ones to beat in here. But look, there are other horses in the race. I mean, there's a horse by the name of the Tabulator by Dialed In that, you know, you dig in his pedigree. A lot of stamina in the pedigree, and he's 2 for 2. He was a $460,000 2-year-old purchase. You know, there's a horse that has shown some quality. I think he'll appreciate 2 turns too. So really, when I'm looking at this race, the Iroquois, it's those 3 horses for me. The Tabulator, 10 City, and Hollywood Star. Very interested to see how they stretch out, and that's really going to make a big impact on my TCI Top 5.
You know, the weather's supposed to be good here this weekend too at Churchill. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, when these 2-year-olds win at Churchill, it always is like now they've had a win over the surface. Does that affect kind of going into next year when you look at them as 3-year-olds at Churchill?
Well, I think it has to mean something. I mean, look at Classic Empire and Super Saver, and we've seen these horses that, you know, obviously had form over that track. You give them credit for that because I do think Churchill can be a typey surface in the springtime, John. We've seen horses that handle it better than others. There's no question about it. So having form there matters. I mean, 10 City, you know, he won the Bashford Manor over Copper Bullet, you know, which is a pretty quality, I thought, early season 2-year-old race in there. So he's shown that he can handle that Churchill surface. So I'm not as concerned about, and Hollywood Star, obviously breaking his mate in Pressville. I mean, he's a horse that got shuffled back, had a tough trip from the inside, and still was able to power through and break his maiden over Bourbon Resolution, who was a really good Saratoga maiden winner. So that was a pretty good field he beat at Churchill first time out. And when I look at Hollywood Star, again, we're projecting around 2 turns. He's out of Hollywood Story. you know, that good Krikorian two-turn family. To me, he looks like a horse that is going to really appreciate two turns more than sprinting. I don't think he wanted to sprint last time out in the Saratoga Special. Tried to come from off the pace, and the sprinters got away from him there at Saratoga, the early season 2-year-olds. I think he's projected to get better, particularly when they go around two turns. So very interested to see how Hollywood Story and Sin City face off, but they got to get good trips from the inside.
Perfect. Thank you, Joel.
Yep.
Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you come back next week. We'll recap these races and see if it affects the TCI top 5s.